Hi, everyone. I'm Doc. I'm a clinical psychotherapist.
And I'm Cece. I'm a professional musician.
We're two friends who spend a lot of time unpacking each other's bullshit.
And this podcast is a way for us to help you through yours.
Welcome to Let's Unpack This.
Hi. Good evening.
What time is it?
This
It's
is our
late.
This is our first time recording an episode at night.
Yeah, we'll see if it's worse.
How does this feel? This feels good for me because by this time of the day, I'm like rearing and ready to go.
Wow, I'm ready for bed.
Last night when you're like, do you want to record in the morning? I was like, what time?
Like 12:30 in the afternoon?
Yeah.
Or...
Yeah, like 10 a.m. has been like too early for me recently.
That's okay. You've been staying up late in quarantine.
Yeah. So how is quarantine going for you? Let's check in real quick before we dive into our topic.
I went for a walk on the beach yesterday before work and had to remove myself and go to the dunes and sit and cry for a while, like an hour. I feel like in my internal world, I'm doing well. I mean, as well as you could, and still really trying to do a lot of the internal work. But when I step outside and am reminded of what's going on, and I hear everyone else's frustrations and everyone else's opinions and everyone else's stuff all day, 5 days a week, and then I leave and I see what other people are doing or not doing, and it just became a lot. Because, like everyone else, I would like to be done with this soon. But it's just a lot to have people like combating you all the time. And I don't say anything, you know? I cannot argue back with people.
Yeah.
And then I really try not to just in my personal life because I just don't see the point. And
yeah, it's exhausting.
Yeah, so I just had to let some of that out and meet that need for myself instead of stuffing it. Because, you know, when I was walking on the beach, I was just seeing a lot of things that were really frustrating and feeling very unsafe myself. And, like, I have to get outside. Like, I have to get some air, just like everybody else. Like, I have to get some sun. If I don't, like, I feel it physically like everyone else does. And I felt like I couldn't even do that safely.
That's how I feel.
Yeah. And so I've been noticing a lot of my, like, inner child stuff coming up.
Right.
Feeling unsafe, really trying to allow myself to not feel abandoned emotionally, really trying to meet all of my needs physically and emotionally, knowing that I can't really search externally for that, especially right now. And, I mean, that's not sustainable anyway. So I'm okay, but I think just, like, as okay as you could be.
Yeah.
How are you doing?
Well, I feel like I've been on a little bit of an emotional roller coaster this week. Like, I have really good days, and then I
feel that.
have some not so good days. I feel like the not good days come out of nowhere. Like the other day, you know, we live in this small town, and I went down to like the main street, and I had to pick something up, and I went to this shop that I, you know, used to spend a lot of time in, and I opened the door, and it just like hit me like every once in a while I'll do something and it'll remind me of the, you know, routine and normalcy of life before, and it's like, you know, we've talked about this before. I'm having these like little like flashbacks and trauma responses to, you know, that kind of being stripped away. So just like I sat in my car for like 15 minutes and cried, and it felt really good because I feel like during this, like I've had I've been not stuffing things, but like trying to like practice that radical acceptance to the point where like I haven't really been able to like dig into the pain of it. And but same, like walking around and seeing how other people are acting, I'm having to, you know, obviously like work on not being judgmental, right? And it's really hard because you're right, like and you hit the nail on the head. Like I'm feeling unsafe, not just physically because of the virus, but emotionally because people are acting a way
Right.
that's out of alignment with what I believe to be true. Right? So it's I mean, like, isn't that the root of most of my problems anyway?
Yes.
All the time. You know, responding to a situation out of fear because, you know, somebody isn't acting the way I want them to.
Oh.
But today I had like a mini breakdown. My boyfriend, I made brownies last night. I told you earlier.
Yo.
I live with an absolute terrorist.
You live with a monster.
He was like joking around, but
Not really.
last night at 9:00 I made these brownies. Like brownies have been my special treat. Every, you know, week or two I'll make a tray of brownies.
They're great.
They were so, and this batch was even better. So let me just.
Oh.
So he ate 4, right? There's a tray. There's 9 in the tray. He ate 4 last night, and then today we were like sitting on the couch and he was getting a brownie. I was like, "Oh, get me one." So he just brought the whole tray in because we were just gonna share it. But then he started breaking them up like into little like I don't even know what he was doing, but it just got to me so bad. And then he went into the kitchen and got whipped cream and sprayed it all over the rest of the brownies. And like I don't like whipped cream. It's not like I can't eat it, but I'm like, you just ruined my favorite treat. And we were laughing so hard because I started like picking up the brownies with my fingers and I was like kind of crying in the brownies. And he's like, "Are you okay?" He's like, "Are you having a nervous breakdown?" And it was one of those things where I was laughing so hard, or I was crying really hard and laughing at the fact that I was crying. And I had to clarify to him. I was like, "Let me be clear that I am not laughing so hard that I'm crying. It's the other way around."
Right. Like, I'm laughing at the fact that I'm crying this hard about my brownies because this is all I have right now.
Yeah, there's just so many situations this week where I've had to deal with situations where I felt really out of control. Not me, but I felt like I couldn't control anything in my life, and I just felt really powerless to all that. So my brownies were my coping mechanism.
Listen, I would like to validate you right now and say whoever puts fucking whipped cream on brownies
You're like, why?
is a fucking monstrous human being and should be put away. And if you're listening and you do that, I'm so sorry.
We're going to have to do a poll on our social media. Whipped cream on brownies or no?
Oh, you just fucking ruined it.
Yeah, so
Maybe on a brownie sundae, but this isn't a sundae.
there was no ice cream to be had.
No.
Because I've
No.
eaten it all. All the ice cream is gone.
No, I also get really sick from whipped cream, so it's a
Yeah, I'm not like lactose intolerant, but I
thing.
try not to eat dairy because I break out so bad. So like whipped cream is an unnecessary dairy product.
it's an
I know a lot of
unnecessary evil.
people would disagree. Like a lot of people like whipped cream.
Well, they're fucking terrorists. So anyway, I think we just lost all our listeners.
They're all like, "We love whipped cream. Fuck all of you. Bye."
Oh, by the way, someone that we're friends with heard when I talked about how cat people are the worst, and she's like, "Yeah, you fucking said that," and I turned it right off.
See,
And
so
like, someone who loves me very much said that.
I think I know who you're talking about. So let me just say, like, I love cats, you love dogs. So there isn't, like, we have a little bit of everything for everyone here. No need to turn us off. If you don't like one thing that one person says, the other person probably is the opposite anyway. Right?
Yeah, and also say whatever fucking comes to my mind and don't filter it. So that's just what
just how
happens.
it
And we just
rolls.
need to go with it. Yeah. We'll get into why that is in a later episode, but it's because of the planets. Anyway, it's not because of just me not filtering myself. It's okay.
So our
So,
topic
what are we
today.
talking about
So to say that this topic is really I don't know. It's coming at a good time because I'm feeling it. You've been wanting to do this topic. You've brought it up a couple of times because you've stated how it's come up recently with everybody being quarantined and dealing with all this craziness. So today we're going to talk about the inner child. Wah! Wah! So
Mine is
do you want to give
6.
some facts on what the hell that is? What does that mean? People are probably listening like, what is that?
Yeah, well, everyone has one. So buckle up, my friends. And if you haven't met your own yet, that's great because once you do, it's all fucking over. I'm just kidding. But the inner child, it's a part of our mind, just like the ego is. And we've talked a lot about the ego in previous episodes, and the ego actually protects our inner child. Mm-hmm. But our inner child is part of the mind that has had all of our life experiences as a child. And it is the part of us that is made up of all of those experiences, all of our conditioning, all of the needs that we did or did not get met. And it's the part of us that is still striving for a lot of those needs to get met. So it's the part of us that comes up when we throw temper tantrums, when we are afraid, when we become very angry. So, you were talking earlier about getting frustrated and, by seeing people outside, I was talking about the same thing and
Right.
wanting to control. So it's the part of us that comes up when fearful. It's the part of us that comes up, especially in relationships with others. Mm-hmm. So, our inner child is like the part of me. I'm just going to give my example. And when I ever do meditations on it or have ever done any inner child work on it, mine always comes up usually at the age of 6. I had a lot of stuff happen at age 6. I had a lot of stuff happen at other ages, but that was the earliest that I can remember pivotal occurrences happening with my parents where they taught me that I could not trust and that I could not trust myself and that it was not okay to show emotion and it was not okay to express my emotion. So it's the part of us that didn't get any needs met,
Right.
growing up and didn't get the needs met that we were supposed to get met by our parents but didn't because of their own conditioning. Mm-hmm. And it's the part of us that we usually don't know about, just like our ego. Like most people don't actually know what the ego is. Most people don't know what an inner child is. And so we just kind of walk around like little kids in grown-up bodies, just acting out all the time. And that's why we kind of all can't stand each other.
Yeah.
And it's coming up a lot right now. I'm seeing it with clients. I'm seeing it in the public. I'm seeing it with loved ones, with friends, like a lot of defiance, a lot of combating, a lot of bullshit. Mm-hmm. And it's all our younger selves coming up out of fear and us not knowing how to parent our own selves.
So this
if
has
that makes sense.
Yeah, absolutely. So it has a lot to do with the part of us that reacts to things, how we react to things and as a child, right?
Yeah. Our unresolved emotions, needs that weren't met, times where we felt scared. So, absolutely.
Very interesting.
All of that. Yeah. And I always tell clients as a way to try to find compassion for others and act in compassion for others, try to imagine that our parents, the people that we're dealing with in day to day, are quite literally, when you're not evolved, when you haven't done work on yourself, you are quite literally a little kid in your adult body. And
that's so great. And I heard somebody else say that before and it really stuck with me. When you're dealing with somebody, whether it's somebody you like or don't like, imagine that like they were a baby once.
They were a baby.
They were a baby. They still might be a baby, but like if you choose to look at everyone as a child, as a baby, and see the innocence in who they were, and the fact that they had a whole bunch of conditioning and things happen to them that made them, you know, turn out to be the way they are or react the way they do, then it allows you to be way more compassionate with people. And if you do that with yourself, right? Like I have to do that with myself too.
That's the kicker.
Yeah. It's easy to, I think for me, it's easier to employ that when dealing with other people than it is with my own self.
Why do you think that is?
Because when I think of my inner child, I think of someone insecure and undeserving, right? Like I'm not deserving of that forgiveness and empathy and compassion, but like I can do that for other people.
Who do you think you learned that from? Welcome to therapy.
My parents, for sure. Not just
Both
my
of them?
parents, just a lot of the adult influences in my life. I had a lot of like very giving people in my life growing up. You know, I had a grandmom who I was really close to, and you know, they were the kind of people that would like do anything for anyone, right? But so like I learned the compassion from that, but it didn't allow me to learn how to like look at myself and take care of myself.
Right. First of all, it is not our fault how we may have been raised, how we may have been treated, what we may have learned, may have observed. Our parents, we've said this before, have always done the best that they could,
Yeah,
and the best that they know
absolutely.
how, with the knowledge and experience that they have, and they conditioned us based off of their own conditioning.
Exactly.
That's it. And we repeat now as adults what we know based off of what the people who taught us all of that when they repeated what they knew. So we just do what they did, and they did what they were taught. And it's just, that's where intergenerational trauma comes from. That's why the generational lines of these behavioral patterns run so deep.
Yes.
These wounds run so deep. We're all just quite literally doing the best that we can based off of what we know how. And that's why it's so painful that when you learn differently but continue to do the same thing over and over again, because our nervous systems genuinely become committed. We've talked about that in other ways before. They become committed to certain dynamics, certain feelings, literally emotional addiction, become committed to certain types of people. So we can have the self-knowledge but then keep doing the same thing over and over again. Whew. And that's a painful place. I know that place all too well. And there's a lot of grace and forgiveness, going to what you were talking about, that comes from inner child work and healing of oneself. Hey, like, your brain took on all this shit on its own. Like, you didn't choose to believe that you were unlovable or unworthy. You didn't choose to learn certain things from your parents and not others. Like, our brains do this all on their own.
Right. While you were explaining that, I really wanted to ask you this question. I didn't want to forget, so I'm going to ask you now. It's a little off topic, but what do you think? Actually, it's on topic. Just listen to the question. So, what do you think about the ideology? I don't know if you have any knowledge on this, of that we carry the trauma from our ancestors with us, right? So it's this idea that the things that our parents went through, or our grandparents or their grandparents, through our DNA carries on, right? So like the anxieties that we have may have been formed generations ago from, you know, things in war that happened. So like these psychological traumas that happened get passed down through the years. What do you think about that idea?
Oh yeah, absolutely. We could go even fucking deeper than that.
Yeah.
And go into past life shit. But
I know, I thought it was like kind of a heavy thing for us to go into.
I mean, we can always unpack that, like, both of those things in depth later too.
Yeah.
But just to touch on it, I am a firm believer, and only because I've done a lot of work on it personally and with clients. So I've had actual experiences where I have worked through generational trauma, where I have learned about my generational trauma,
Right.
where I've done my own past life regressions,
Right.
and gone back to them in healing work and have done it with clients. So because I have a ton of experience with it, I
Yeah,
can
that's
speak
basically, I wanted to
to
know
that.
if you had experience with that, because it's kind of a thing that like people are like, is that actually a thing or is it not?
Yeah, I mean, when I was younger, I had a lot of fears. My anxiety started pretty young, and they were fears that didn't make sense. Like I always had the fear of being kidnapped. I always had the fear of feeling unsafe, which partly does come from my lifetime now, like my parents, but a lot of fears about health. And the health stuff is very much passed down through my generational lines.
Right.
But a lot of the fears that came up that wouldn't make sense because those things didn't happen to me in this lifetime, I later learned when I did past life regressions that those things had happened to me in past lives of mine.
Wow.
So we do carry this stuff with us, and it's more of in our souls, not necessarily, and in our subconscious. It is in our DNA, but it's a lot more of what we end up carrying with us that's so deeply embedded in our soul subconscious versus, like, oh, like in my, my biology, like I'm carrying this stuff. But like I said, our nervous systems become committed, like every part of our body becomes committed to these traumas. And when I say trauma, that does not mean that you had to be physically abused or neglected.
Right.
Like this trauma is a all-encompassing word that encompasses everything from your reality being denied growing up to, emotional abandonment to, actually being held at gunpoint. Like trauma resides within everyone. It's not just having to meet the criteria
Right.
in the DSM-5, which is the Diagnostic Statistical Manual that I basically want to rip up and throw out anyway. So,
Why is that?
because I think it's really unfair to diagnose somebody off of a very specific set of criteria. On both ends. One, to just diagnose anybody with any type of one label when there are so many different factors that go into why someone is suffering from what they're suffering from.
Right.
And then two, like if you don't meet all the criteria for a diagnosis, then you just don't have that diagnosis. Like if you don't meet all 7 of these things, then you don't have this type of depression, but you have 6.
I was told I wasn't depressed enough to be clinically depressed.
See, exactly my fucking point.
Yeah. They're like, you're not
bullshit.
depressed enough to be considered depressed, but that's neither here nor there. I know
And
I'm
then
fucking, I suffer from depression, but thank you. Thank you. If you're trying to, like, what are you trying to make me feel better or?
Who fucking knows? Because that's the dumbest thing I've ever heard. But I hear that a lot, and that's just another example of how your reality has been denied, and therefore another way for you to not build trust in self. Like, oh my gosh, don't get me started on the way our country handles mental health. It's literally the worst. But,
Yeah.
but what was I even talking about?
I just triggered you.
I got
so
very
bad.
heated.
I just triggered you really bad. I'm sorry, but we were.
I don't know if it's my sunburn or if like I'm just like really hot all of a sudden, but I'm heating up.
Yeah, you were talking about the. Yeah. Okay. I think we just re-traumatize ourselves.
It's okay.
So no, I was just
harsh
interested.
reality.
I was just interested in hearing your experience with that. With an idea that I had read about and find interesting.
Yeah.
Because I know from experience that I've carried, anxiety and worry that was taught, a lot of that was taught to me. not consciously. You know, it wasn't something that you know, a parent role or a teacher was like, here, have this. It was, they carried it, and I learned
Yep.
through watching how they acted and how they responded to things. So a lot, and that's like the honest truth of it, you know, and trying to face that now as an adult, taking responsibility for it. It's like I can say, okay, yes, I was taught this, but now it's my responsibility to change this and work on this for myself.
Absolutely. You know, what I take from my parents, and I don't mean this in a negative way, it's just the reality, is more of how they are, what I've observed, rather than what they purposefully tried to teach me verbally. So I don't know if you have this experience. I see it a lot with clients. I see it with myself. I am like half of my dad and half of my mom. Like I do all the shit that my dad does and like all the shit that my mom does.
Yep.
And like, I'm like, God damn it. I'm literally like not how I want it to be.
Yep.
And they are not things that they sat down and taught me or like tried to teach me. They are things that I observed in how they react, in how they respond, in how they treat themselves. So that's speaking to what you were talking about, like just even again the behavioral side of how this trauma gets passed down. I'm very much like my grandmother in a lot of ways, you know, and so you look at the quote caregivers that you had, whether they're your biological parents or not, doesn't matter. Like whoever the biggest influencers in your life were growing up, like that's what you observed and what you took from everything that you learn about the world around us in school, about, you know, in peer groups. We carry this stuff with us, and it's, again, not a choice. Like, we don't have the development growing up and you know, we're young children, toddlers, adolescents, to decide, like, oh, like, I don't want to carry this with me into adulthood, so I'm going to, like, rework this right now. Like, we don't realize that this is happening,
right?
that our brain's taking all of this on.
That makes me think of, like, what we talked about in the past, like how things will bring me back to a certain time in my childhood or high school, you know, and I'll react a certain way to a certain situation because it reminds me of an experience that I had in the past. And
Yes.
and trying now to react differently, knowing that that's the case, you know, like knowing maybe I'm acting out of fear or, you know, I'm acting out of ego or anger.
Well, what you're describing is exactly what it looks like when your inner child, when the inner child part of you comes up, is scared, feels unheard, unseen, misunderstood.
Yes.
You know, those are the three basic needs that we have, you know, and not just growing up, but in adulthood,
Right.
that we often don't get met by our parents because our parents weren't taught, one, how to see, hear, and understand others, but also were not seen, heard, and understood by their own parents usually or their own caregivers. So when we don't have those needs met growing up, we don't learn how to do that for ourselves. We continuously try to seek that out, you know, in adulthood.
Right.
And so when we are feeling threatened in any way, that's that part of us coming up. And that's why we often will act out or we'll revert back to old behaviors or we'll act very childish or very childlike, act very scared. And so much of this is us becoming like the wise older parent for ourselves, like becoming the parent, and we'll get into that later, but, you know, becoming the parent that we didn't have. I don't know if you felt this way growing up, but, you know, how I believe we were taught culturally is like our parents are all loving, all knowing, all protective, always. This is what a family looks like. And if it doesn't look like that, like that's strange. And these are the things that our parents are supposed to do for us. We're not taught that our parents are fellow human beings doing the best that they can. I mean, my mom was younger than I am now when she had both me and my brother and me. And I can't even imagine being a parent that young. Like, no wonder she had no idea what the fuck she was doing. I mean, and my mom was a great mom. She, like, did everything for us. But I would have I don't know how to be a parent now.
Yeah. No,
and I think I'm like,
that's a great point. Like that what you just said about like even with all this stuff, you know, because I was felt led to say like, does everybody deals with this, no matter how good their parent may be, right? Like, so it's
Yes.
like,
Yep.
this isn't to say that anyone's parent is bad or good. It's like no matter what we get, right? No matter what situation we're handed, these are things we're gonna have to work through anyway.
Yes, exactly right. We all have this part of our mind. And that's the same thing that goes for like we all have an ego. Like you and I have talked about how the ego is very misunderstood.
Right.
You know, it's like, oh my God, you have such an ego. Well, we all fucking
We all
do.
have one,
Like, and the ego's not good or bad.
Yeah.
The inner child isn't good or bad. It's just a part of our working mind.
Got it.
So it just is. I have a lot of clients who have wonderful relationships with their parents, had wonderful relationships then, have wonderful relationships now, but their parents are also fellow human beings and did the best that they could, and they still have a ton of fucking issues.
Yeah.
Like because our parents can be great in a lot of ways, but then had to deal with their own shit too. Like when you're a parent, your life doesn't stop. You might try to stop your own life for your kids, but it doesn't work that way. So that's why I end up seeing also too a lot of parents whose kids have grown up and they finally come into counseling like, I don't know who I am. I don't know what I like. I don't know what I don't like. What the fuck am I doing? I don't even like recognize my partner anymore. Who am I?
Who am I? Yeah.
And because they were never taught how to cope properly either, how to figure out who they were. So they come in, you know, midlife crisis type shit.
Wow.
Like, what the fuck am I doing? I see that probably more often than any other demographic.
That's wild.
So it's not good or bad whether you like have this. It just is.
It just is. Yeah.
Yeah. And if we choose to ignore it, like that's when we still repeat patterns. We act very childish. Like we don't end up reconditioning ourselves or reparenting ourselves. We just keep doing the same thing over and over again.
Right.
And then if we choose to have kids or can have kids or whatever, you know, your life path is, well, then like you're going to pass it down. So
yeah. So, when you don't choose to look at this, because, right, these parts of ourselves can be the parts we don't really want to look at, the dark parts, the scary parts, the things that are about ourselves that are so deeply ingrained that we don't think we could change, you know. But, you know, when I ignore these things and when I react in a way that is like my inner child, I'm not growing in my relationships, in my life, and I end up acting out of fear a lot of the time.
yeah, absolutely. It's definitely scary thinking about the parts of us that we don't know or don't know well yet. And you know, I'm just here to say that you're not going to find out anything bad once you meet your younger self.
Right.
It's already there anyway. Your reality will be no different.
Right.
I deal with the same things whether I choose to acknowledge my inner child or not. And the more that I've gotten to know her and understand her and comfort her and learn to be her, you know, the parent that she always needed, like learn to be my own parent, I was going to use a word that I didn't want to use. The more healed that I've become. And I still deal with a lot of abandonment shit. And I still deal with like a lot of issues with seeking external validation and feeling unworthy and feeling unlovable, even though I know that I'm not. I know that I am safe. I have provided a very safe internal and external world for myself as an adult. I take really good care of myself, but I still deal with that stuff because that's just a part of the personality. Like that's just a part of the human experience. And like you and I've talked about before, this work never ends.
No.
Like this is a lifestyle practice that you're going to do or I'm going to do my entire life. And I've fully accepted that. Like I don't do the work to get to an end point where the struggle ends. Like I do the work knowing that the struggle is worth it.
Right.
And that this is just something that I always have to continue. But the more that I've gotten to know my younger self and really appreciate her and give her everything that she didn't get growing up, I've been so much more better off for it. versus it hurting me or harming me
Right.
in any way.
I think it's also interesting to think about, struggling with drugs and alcohol, right? That's like a whole other aspect, right? Because when I was younger, I had that feeling that no matter how many friends I had or how loved I was or, how great my parents were, I always felt less than and different from. And, in some sense, I feel like that carried way longer into my adulthood than it should have comparatively to other people that maybe didn't go down a really shitty path. So a lot of this inner child stuff, carried through my young adulthood because I wasn't able to grow and look at that because I was, I was a shit show.
Right.
So, being able to look at it now is necessary. Like I have to work through that and look at that, especially like, in sobriety. So, I feel like this inner child issue, whatever you want to call it, right? Like I had all these behaviors when I was still a kid, like, self-harm. I was really insecure and I didn't get and I didn't feel heard, right? Like you always touch on that, and that's like that rings true for me. Like as a kid, like I didn't feel understood, I didn't feel heard, and I felt a lot like I was like screaming and begging for somebody to like listen to me and help me, and like I couldn't get that, and my parent figures were just doing the best they could, but that carried into my adulthood. So how do you begin to reframe these things so that they don't come up in a sabotaging way as an adult? It's really difficult to try and completely change basically who you've been your whole life because of your conditioning.
Right. One, I want to say everything you said, I feel on a very, very deep level. It's so real. And I mean, that's what we do. We learned to seek out love growing up. When we did not get those needs met, we didn't get the love that we needed. Like, especially even just as early as when we're infants, and maybe if our parents taught us try to teach us how to self-soothe. By the way, like an infant self-soothing is not a thing. That's not a thing that we have, that we know how to do as infants.
What is that? Is that actually a thing that people do?
When you let your baby cry until they fall asleep.
Oh, right.
Yeah, don't get me fucking started. Babies don't know how to do that. But okay. Anyway, so when so that's how early this can start. And obviously when you're an infant, you don't have the mechanisms to be like, oh, my mom's just really tired and doesn't want to, wants me to just go to fucking sleep. Anyway, so a couple things to what you're speaking before I get into the how is remembering that these are going to be the types of things that come up initially. So, because our ego steps in to tell us stories. And again, remember, like I said earlier, the ego is there to protect the inner child. So we're going to have the self-deprecating thoughts, the self-doubting thoughts, the self-blaming thought. Like those are going to come up. The initial response to want to act out and self-sabotage could still come up. It's learning first how to become very compassionate with ourselves and understanding what our conditioning looks like,
right?
What the inner workings of our mind look like, so that when they come up, we don't, one, beat ourselves up more for it happening, for being a human being, and having these that all of us have. And then two, learning how not to then follow through with them.
Right.
Like just because I have this thought or my ego is coming up to tell me a story, it's not because I haven't done enough work. It's not because I'm not doing anything wrong. It's not because I'm, not healed enough or not doing enough. It's just, that's just what's going to happen.
Yeah. And I don't have to act out on it. Right.
Yeah. So a lot of compassion, a lot of understanding yourself and how the human mind works and the human body works, but then also then it's doing differently. So opposite action, reconditioning, reparenting, they're all like the same concept, but using different words. So we have to become the parents that we didn't have. And again, that's not saying that we had bad parents, but we become, the wise, inner parent that we need, that our inner child needs. So, growing up, we learned how to betray ourselves for love. Like you were saying, like, I absolutely relate. Like, I would perform. I would get straight A's. I would make sure I look perfect. I do that now. Like, I thought that I had to do all these things in order to receive love. And that's what I, quote, learned. So instead, we learn how to no longer betray ourselves and instead give ourselves what we need versus continuously seeking out the same types of dynamics or the same types of people or the same types of emotions over and over again, just because that's what we're used to. Does that make sense?
Yeah, definitely.
It's really important to learn how to not sustain things that no longer sustain us.
Right.
Like, no longer doing the same things over and over and over and over again, expecting them to just get, for us to get different results. I mean, the definition literally of insanity, knowing that that's going to be what our ego wants us to do. That's going to be what, our nervous systems are going to lean us towards, but not what we need now as adults who are trying to reparent ourselves.
Making that choice, the more you practice it, actually begins to feel good. When you go against that impulse to act, the way you used to, or when you decide to finally change something that you've been doing over and over again. I feel like that's when I can feel the growth if I'm acting a certain way, right? If my attitude's a certain way and I decide in the middle of the day to like literally basically snap myself out of it, it's kind of, because it's hard for me to see like when there's growth, but when I make those little changes and take those little steps, then I can actually feel it, and it's gratifying.
Absolutely. And this is to validate the experience of us continuing to do what we've always done because it feels safe. So it feels safe to be stressed. It feels safe to thrive in chaos, like stress and chaos and, our emotional hits from anger and sadness and grief. Like that's all safe, quote, safe to us. It's not as adults. That's why it doesn't serve us anymore. But to our inner child, that is familiar.
Yes.
That's why we continue to get ourselves in the same types of relationships or seek those types of people out, like because all of that to us is so familiar, aka what our ego believes to be safe.
Right.
But then we find out, oh shit, I still feel unsafe because these things are not actually safe for me. So going back to something that you were saying earlier, like trying to control and change people, like that's something that a lot of us do. Trying to get our parents to love us in the way that they needed, trying to get our partners to change, beating ourselves up into behaving differently, criticizing other people to get them to behave differently, judgment. Like these are all things that are like fantasies to our inner child. Like, oh, if only my parent loved me the way that I needed them to. If only this person changed into who I needed them to be, like then I would feel loved and worthy. And like that never happened.
Right.
So you start to change that. You start to learn how to not betray yourself by like what you had just said, making these small choices for ourselves. So, and this is not speaking to what you were saying earlier. It just happens to be something like going to bed earlier, like working out, moving your body, creativity, like drawing, painting, actually like doing things that we used to do when we were younger that really helped us. Movements included in that, whether that's working out or just moving your body in other ways, like dance or, just walking.
Yeah,
yoga,
going for a
whatever
bike
it may be.
ride.
Yes. Getting outside, journaling. Journaling's a big one. And my favorite inner child meditation.
Yes. Maybe you
Getting
could
to
share
actually
it
know
when
her.
we post this episode. You could share some of those.
I will. I'll actually share at the end before we wrap up.
Okay, great.
One that I actually recommend to a lot of clients.
Yeah, I just want to note. Because I just thought of this. I like when I think of I think back to a time when I was younger and I had a lot of trouble facing things and coping with things. And I remember my mom would say to me, like, how are you going to ever deal with real things in the, like, when you're an adult? And at the time I was like, I don't know. Like, look at me. I can't even deal with having to face a teacher or, an authority figure as a kid. And I didn't know how to regulate my emotions. I didn't know like how to respond in a way that wasn't in fear. And that carried with me, and it still is something that I carry with me and I have to work through. And I've said this before, like it was told to me like I have to change these things by practicing them and making them a habit. And then like you were just saying, then it becomes, you start doing the opposite behavior and then you can see the change.
Absolutely. I mean, just like you can't lose 30 pounds after working out once, you're not
Wait,
going
what?
to be...
You can't?
No, I'm so sorry to inform you. But just like you can't do that, you can't also recondition all of your, fucked up behavioral pattern. Well, they're not even fucked up. They just are what they are. What you've known for so long, it's just not going to happen after one meditation or like one journaling session or one therapy session or, oh, I've like developed the awareness. Now I'm cured. Like, nope. I'm somebody who has a lot of awareness and knows a lot of shit from whatever the fuck I've learned in school for however many years, and I still betray myself.
Right.
So
yeah, so it's a lifelong thing, and it's it has to become a practice.
Something that helps me is I do these things in the morning. So when I get up, like I meditate, I do my journaling, I work out, I do most of all of my stuff in the morning. And then as I see fit throughout the day, like if I need to stop and do some breath work or I take a class or sometimes I do meditate also at night, specifically inner child ones to like release everything. But I try to do everything when I first get up so that I don't have the rest of the day to forget about it or push it off. And that's a way that I've been able to stay over time. It was something that I had to practice, become disciplined in. Like it truly is learning to become disciplined.
Yeah, I think that's really important. I've actually been doing, I want to start meditating in the morning. I've been doing it at night, just because it really helps me get to sleep and like end the day. But yeah, I want you to send me some of these inner child meditations because now
I will.
I'm interested.
It's also really important, and this is something you've talked about, to connect with other people and to speak our truth.
Right.
Those are two really important things too, and how to become, the parent that you need, and becoming very aware, which takes observing, takes meditation, takes sitting with self, which I know is very uncomfortable, but it's necessary in order to meet ourselves and to meet our inner children. Learning how we speak to ourselves, like getting to know what our inner dialogue is, becoming that observer like you and I have talked about before. Our inner dialogue or negative self-talk is so mean because it's trying to protect us. Like our ego is an asshole because it's trying to protect us, but it's not actually protecting us, from what it really needs to be. Like it's really just protecting us from like getting rejected or feeling uncomfortable or feeling afraid, but it's not actually like helping us or serving us in any way.
My inner monologue is psychotic. Like truly.
Yeah. Really.
Did you see that article a couple months ago about it said like that someone didn't have an inner monologue?
Yes.
It was like a viral post that people were posting where it was like, some people don't have inner monologues.
Yeah, so I can relate to that on a certain level. So, like, my friend brought that up. I guess we were both there, unless I'm, like, making this up in my head. But there was a time, and I don't know, it could be. And by the way, it was not a couple months ago because we were fucking quarantined a couple months ago. So I'm pretty sure this was, like, in the winter. But how disturbing is that statement that I just made? So very sad. But I don't have one that streams all day only because I've worked on it. It
So
comes up
what do you hear?
nothing.
I'm so scared. And I
Mm-hmm.
definitely remember this conversation.
Yes. Yeah. It used to be, but just from doing a lot of work on it, it's gotten much. It's only when my ego, my ego is protecting my inner child, or my ego feels threatened, that it comes up in negative self-talk.
Not even just negative though. Like right now, you don't have like when you're thinking, you don't like hear it in your head.
No, but here's why. It's because I've practiced so much in my career to be very mindful when someone else is talking, or like be mindful in the present moment. It's just literally practice.
That's so interesting.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So anyway,
I'm just staring at you now because I want to see if I can see your inner monologue if you can't hear.
I mean,
it.
I've definitely like gone off my like
Yeah.
and like gone places like when other people, but it's practice. It's not that it won't happen. It's just that I've been able to practice it not
Right.
becoming a disturbance or me.
Yeah, no,
Like,
I don't mean like
giving attention to it.
I don't have one like in a like when I'm talking to you. It's just I notice my thoughts when I'm about to say something. I guess because I'm employing some sort of filter because I'm not used to it. So that's
that
like
makes sense.
that's like what but yeah, like during the day, like when I'm alone, I have like my own best friend in my head, and it's either really mean or really fun and interesting and like creative and nice. But
Yeah.
it can go either way.
Two things. One is probably also the difference between that with you and me is that, as I said earlier, I don't really use a filter. And two, that nice, creative, loving part of yourself is you. Mm-hmm. Is you. The not so nice part of yourself is your ego. It's not you. I just want to point that out again for our listeners.
Yeah.
I also want to say too, when and if you ever start doing inner child work, it can feel like a very heavy grieving process. I cry a lot when I do inner child meditations, and I'm not saying that to scare anybody away from them. They're actually very freeing, very relieving. It's almost like a huge release after. It's very needed. I can tell that it was very needed. Grief is love with no place to go. And I have to give that love back to my younger self consistently. And if not, then I feel very abandoned, very afraid, very unsafe. And, she lives within me, and I have to provide her with this safe space no one else can.
Right.
So I just want to point that out kind of like as a disclaimer, like it's okay if it feels like you're grieving something, because you kind of are. You're grieving the love that like your younger self didn't get. And not because we didn't deserve it or because it maybe our parents didn't try to give it to us, but it just didn't happen.
Right. Yeah.
This is also like the crux of daddy issues. But
I was thinking the same. Are we going to get into that?
oh my gosh, are we in each other's heads like always?
We always are. Maybe we should hold off on that for another day.
But Cece and I both have daddy issues.
Seriously.
And this is where that comes from.
And the idea of that has changed for me. Like, from, like, being, when I was a kid, like, I was really close to my dad, and now as an adult, like, that's kind of changed. The situation has changed. So, this is, like, a new idea for me.
Mm-hmm.
And it definitely, you know, the way that we were taught and conditioned to love and to have relationships by our parents, you know, that's a whole other aspect of it. And like what we saw growing up affects how we act today. And man, we really could do a whole episode on that specifically.
Let's do it.
Yeah. Yeah, we'll hold off on
Okay.
it.
Okay. I do have two suggestions. So for anybody who wants to engage in some inner child meditation, and also a book I recommend as well for this type of
Great.
work is I think I actually sent you a picture of it before. Adult Children of Emotionally Immature Parents.
I think you did. Yeah.
By Lindsay C. Gibson. And then there are two meditations that I'll just put out, but I'll post more as we go along. There's two parts by the same woman, and I highly suggest them. You don't have to do them in order. There just are two. It's called Healing Inner Child and Emotional Processing 1 and 2 by Erin Colleen Garrity, Geraghty, and they are both on the app Insight Timer, which you can get free in the App Store. I don't know if you can find it anywhere else, but that's where I do all my meditations.
Yeah, we'll link those too
Okay, cool.
in the description of the episode. This is
Anything
great
else?
stuff. I feel
Is
like
it?
as heavy as this topic is, I felt much more heavy after other things that we've talked about.
Oh, good.
Yeah.
So I'm
Because
glad that this
there
isn't-
is also that the positive side of this, right? Where, and you talked about that, doing things, you know, those experiences that we had as a child weren't all negative. So if we can go back to that innocent part of us and not forget to employ that today, you know, like with all the joy and confidence that we might have had as a kid that maybe we lost along the way, we can try and regain that.
Yeah. Isn't that beautiful?
It is.
So remember, you are not unlovable until someone loves you.
You are and always have been lovable since you got here. Thanks for
tuning in. We love you.
We love you.
If you like our podcast, please make sure you subscribe wherever you listen to your podcasts. And you can like us on social media. Our Instagram handle is Let's Unpack This Pod. You can find us on Facebook. You can also email us to letsunpackthispodcast@gmail.com and submit your questions or topic ideas. When we read the questions, they will be anonymous, so your name will not be on the podcast. So please feel free to be open about any issues you're having or situations that you would want us to unpack. Please make sure you subscribe to us wherever you listen to your podcast so you can get alerts when our next episode is up. We thank you for listening.